Local check 1, 2, 3. This recorded presentation is going to be showing the TFTP ability to back up and restore files from Cisco devices to an inexpensive desktop machine, and also the password recovery on the router. So what I'm showing on the screen here, we have the screen showing here. I've got a VMware machine, and in the VMware machine, I've run this program called, let me minimize this, TFTP D32, which is a free open source program that can be a TFTP server. And I've got it up and running here to where I'll be able to save stuff from the, we're going to use just a plain old Cisco router called R1 to do this. So let's go to the router and look at the configuration on this. I've done some basic configuration. So if we do like show IP interface brief, I've taken these two interfaces on this router and I've created an interface 1.1.1.1, which is connected to PC-A. And I go ahead and put an IP address on the second port, just so it has an address, and later on when I do password recovery, I need to show something about that. There's a little gotcha when you do password recovery, but after you do no shutdown on all your ports again, even after you restore the original startup configuration. So what I want to do is somehow copy, if we do a dir, this file right here is the operating system file that's present on this particular router. And I want to be able to make a backup copy of that operating system, much the same way that you would take a Windows 10 that was on a desktop machine. You're backing up your machine so you have all of your files saved. I want to be able to back up that operating system file to another location in case it ever gets clobbered for some reason. And I need to restore that. And there's also the file, show the startup configuration file. That's a plain text file. I want to be able to back that up too. The idea here is if you have your configuration backed up and you've got a hardware maintenance contract with Cisco and all the smoke starts coming out of your router, you'll place a phone call to the Cisco SmartNet, their help desk for their hardware maintenance, hardware and software maintenance group, but you pay a recurring annual fee to get that. And they will send you a new router out, a replacement router that still has all the smoke encapsulated in it still for you to use on that. But it won't have your configuration on it. It might not even have the right iOS that you're stuck with in your particular enterprise. So once you get that router back, you can restore the startup configuration to it, and you're back in business. If you need to fix the iOS, you can do that as well. But they got to be backed up first. So let's look at how to back these up. Good practice says, before you do any type of TFTP copy information, you should check to see if you can ping the device. So this workstation is configured, this router is configured as 1.1.1.1. And if we look at the configuration on the VMware PCA, he's configured to be 1.1.1.11. And his default gateway is 1.1.1.1. So they ought to be able to ping each other. So I'll go to the router, bring back the router up here on the screen, and I should be able to ping 1.1.1.11, which is that router, which is the router pinging the PC. And the PC, is, of course, would be able to ping the router too. Okay, so I did the first step. I proved that I could ping the TFTP router. The other step is make sure there's enough room. I'll show the directory here. And let me see if I click browse, what does that do? You want to make sure that there's enough room on the hard disk drive that's present. I'll just use this. Click on this PC, and the hard drive's got 107 gigabytes free. So it's got plenty of room to store this startup configuration and the iOS file itself. Okay, so I'll go back to the router prompt. And I'm going to type the command. The copy command is just like the copy command in DOS. If I wanted to copy everything on a D:/CD-ROM drive to the C: directory, I would type that. It would copy from D to C. I want to copy the startup configuration file to the TFTP server. I'll back it up. So we're going to get a guided configuration dialog here. I'm going to press this. And he needs to know what is the name or the address of that remote host. Well, that's that VMware PCA 1.1.1.11. What do you want the name of that file to be in the file system of the desktop PC when he saves that text file for the startup configuration file, by default, it's going to be called R1-TFTP, which is the host name of the router, and he puts the word config on it. You can change that if you want to, but I'll just leave that the same. And a copy is fine. Warning, Will Robinson, and when you bring this up for the first time, if you don't browse to, it's going to come up by default on the programs directory, and you don't have rights to write to the program directory. So I changed it to the download directory, which I have rights to write to. Now, let's copy the, well, I better type it out here because I have to spell it correctly. Okay, I'm going to copy the flash directory. Copy the flash directory to the TFTP server, and he's going to ask me, what's the file name of the iOS file? This file right here. What's the file name of that file? I have to type it out exactly the way it is typed there. So I'll very carefully type this, and it's C1841-IPbase-124-3i.bin. And if there's any mistyping in there, it'll fail to find the exact file name. It's got to be exactly as spelled. Now, what is the source address? What is that remote destination device that we're saving the TFTP server? I'm at desktop PC 1.1.1.11. And what do you want to call that file name when it actually does get stored on that desktop PC? I'll just let it be the same name. Okay, now this is more than a couple hundred lines in the startup configuration file, so it's going to take a moment to copy it. It's we look up here. It's 114. It's approximately 14 meg. So we can see in this dialog screen up here, he's copied 4 meg. He's copied 5 meg. He's copied 6 meg. It'll take a second for it to copy all this stuff up. We're restricted by the speed between the desktop PC device, which has a fast Ethernet port on it, and this particular router, this 1841 router, has got a fast Ethernet port. So we're stuck to 100 megabit per second. We're already at 11 meg. We're almost got it completed now because it was 14 meg, something like that. Okay, I copied it. So let's show the directory. And we can see that here is our file that we copied, the C1841. It's 14 meg or so. Here is the R1 TFTP config. It's only 676 characters. It's a short text file. So now we have this all backed up, and we can restore it. So if this router blew up and had to be replaced under warranty or with the service contract, I could get the new device, and I would be able to restore the existing configuration back in there very quickly using copy TFTP instead of actually having to type the lines in over and over again. Or what if I didn't have a good backup? I have to make it all up over again. So I'll close this. And I'll close this. Okay, so I've showed copying back and forth between TFTP server, which it has the word server. It doesn't have to be a server class product. It doesn't have to be an expensive rack mount, Dell, or Cisco type server. It can be any old desktop that you cast off that nobody else wants to use, and just get a $50 big huge hard drive and put it in there to store other stuff. Same thing you would do with a syslog server. You just need any old junk workstation, put a huge drive in it so it can save all the log files, and it can save all the backups of all your devices. Okay, let me see. I'm going to stop the VMware now. We should be able to let it shut down. So he's going to shut down here, and then I'll be able to stop that application for a minute. Okay. I think he's finished. If I float over this, it looks like he's in the inactive state. I can stop that application. So now we have just, let me move this up to the top here. Oh, there we go. And let me make it a little bit bigger. You'll allow me to make it bigger. Okay, now let's turn to the subject of password recovery. So we know what the passwords are here. Let me log off. The first password is Cisco. That's the console password. And to get to the privileged exec mode, I have to know that it's class. So if you do show running configuration on this, We can see the host name of the router that I specified. We can see I said enable password class instead of enable secret class, so it would still show it on the screen. The old enable password command does exactly the same thing as enable secret class. You have to type class to get from the user exec mode to the privileged exec mode, but it doesn't encrypt it on the screen. And I haven't done any service password encryption or anything on this running configuration, so it'll show it in plain text form. And then I have the 1.1.1.1 address for fast Ethernet first fast Ethernet port, and 2.2.2.2 for the second fast Ethernet port. And then our password Cisco for coming into the console port, or if you're coming through Telnet or Secure Shell, it will be that particular password. So show IP interface brief. All those interfaces are up and up. 00 is plugged into a PC workstation, and fast Ethernet 01, I just use the node keep alive command, so it'll stay up and up. And I'm doing this for a reason, because when we do password recovery, there's a gotcha when you recover your password back. So did I save this? Let me see. Let me do a copy, run, start, just to make sure it's backed up. And then if I do show the startup configuration, it's exactly the same. I just backed it up. Now, another important command is show version when applied to password recovery. And we can see the configuration register here is 2102. And what we're going to do is, you can go to the global configuration mode. You can change the configuration register. You normally don't need to do that unless you're doing disaster recovery, like recovering a bad iOS file or resetting an unknown password on a device without destroying the complete configuration of it. So what we're going to do now is pretend that we don't know that it's Cisco and class, and I'm going to reload the router. Now, once I start the reload the router process, if it was looking at the boot up process of the router, he takes the iOS operating system file and he uncompresses it into RAM memory, and he executes it from RAM, because RAM is 1,000 times faster than flash memory. So we get good performance. And if I was trying to get into a router that I didn't know what the password was, maybe the guy changed the password and got mad and quit, or no one just ever bothered to write it down. We don't know what the password is. We need to be able to know what the password is for that device, because we need to do maintenance on the router or things of that nature. So how do I get in there and I don't know the password? I want to be able to reset the password without changing any of the other configurations. So I can't just erase the startup configuration and start a whole new thing with a password that I know. So what I'm going to do here is, if I was a Cisco consultant, I was brought on site because the last guy left and never wrote anything down, and we want to recover the password for this router, we don't care what the previous password was. We just want to set it to something we know. So I'm going to restart the router, and let's assume we don't know any passwords here. I'll type the reload command. When I type the reload command or turn the power off and on the router, you've got 60 seconds to, I'm going to show you here before I go into it. I'm going to go control, send break. When the router first boots up, he's got a short period of time where you can send the break character. Let's use our analogy of our Windows desktop PC. When you first boot a Windows desktop PC, you've got a short period of time to press, it's usually the F5 key or the F8 key, and you want to go into the VGA recovery mode, or the mode where you want to fix up the video driver because your video driver is messed up. You only have a short amount of time to press that. So on the router, when the router boots up, we've only got about 60 seconds when it starts booting up to send that break character, and we're going to be dumped into the ROM monitor mode. I'm going to tell it to reload. Okay, now it's starting to reload, and I'm going to send the control break character to it. I only have a few seconds here to send the break. Okay, so it aborted the load, and it left me at something called the ROM monitor prompt. This is a sort of a stripped down iOS that is not capable of routing packets. It's only there for disaster recovery. It's there for copying a new iOS if your iOS got corrupted on the flash card. It's there for resetting the password if you needed to, you didn't know what the password was and you needed to retain all the rest of the existing configuration that was in that startup configuration file. So what I want to do is go to something called the configuration register. That was when I did show version. The configuration register normally by default is 2102. I want to change it. That's actually a series of 16 switches, and we use 4 hexadecimal characters to do that. We can do things like change the baud rate instead of 9600, But what I want to do is change one of the switches. And remember when you rebooted Windows and you didn't know the password, so you held down the F5 key so it would boot into the the system recovery mode? I'm going to change the configuration register and tell it to alter the normal default performance of a router is to boot the iOS and then go and load the startup configuration file if it exists with the passwords that we don't know. I'm going to tell the router to do something different. I'm going to tell the router to go ahead and boot up the iOS and pretend the startup configuration file is not there. Just ignore it. And I'm going to do that with the command configuration register 0x2142 instead of 2102. And I can't forget to change it back when I'm done, because otherwise every time the router boots up with my corrected password, it'll act like an erased router. Okay, so now it is changed. I'll type reset. It'll boot up. But it's going to ignore that startup configuration that I saved with copy run start. It's going to act like a router that's erased. This is a good trick to pull on your lab partner. Change their configuration register when they're not watching the 2142. And then when they reload their router because there's some problem, it'll say, oh, what happened to my configuration? It's gone. It's still there. You just told it to ignore it. So the router is now going through the process of extracting the compressed iOS configuration file, and he's loading it into the RAM memory where it'll run real fast. And the router will do its normal boot up process, and we should get an answer, a question here in a second, as if it didn't have a startup configuration file. See, it says, do you want to enter the configuration dialog? We always say no to that. So we're going to see here that everything's shut down by default. There's no IP addresses. See, host name, router. Well, I thought it was R1 TFTP or something like that. What's going on here? So if I do show IP interface brief, no IP addresses, everything's eventually shut down. Well, in a router that is actually completely erased, if you type enable, there's no password, right? Well, okay, let's blow our minds. Show me the startup configuration file. Oh, look, there it is. There's the router. It's there. It's in the NVRAM. We just set that switch to 2142 and says ignore it. So I'm already at the privileged exec mode. I probably can't see what the enable password is because they probably use enable secret class or whatever it really was. That's okay. I'm already there. I'm just going to change it to something else I really know. So what I'm going to do, you have to be very careful here, because if you have muscle memory and you want to type copy run start. So if I type copy run start right now, it would take the default configuration, show run. There's our default configuration. Nothing, everything's shut down. Nothing's going on here, no passwords. If I type copy run start right now, I would just copy this running configuration, which is blank default factory fresh stuff, and I would delete my startup configuration file, which I want to save. So I have to be very careful with my fingers, and instead of typing copy run start, I'm going to say copy start run. That's going to copy the startup configuration to the RAM memory. Notice that the host name immediately changed back to R1 TFTP. Okay, so now if we look at our show run, everything appears to be back, except notice something. When you have default configuration, it says shutdown. When you type no shutdown, there's no line that says no shutdown. It's just not there. So if I do show IP interface brief at this point, the addresses are there, but they're still administratively shut down. So there's a couple of things I need to do to repair. I've recovered all the information. I just got to be very careful and do a couple of steps here. So I'm going to go to the global configuration mode. I'm going to say interface fastest unit 0/0 and do a no shutdown. And I'm going to say interface F0/1 and do a no shutdown on him. So now show IP interface brief. Okay, everything's cool except I don't know what the password is. All right. So I'm going to get rid of the old password. I'll go to the global configuration mode. I'll say no, enable password. And then I'll say enable secret class. Now I know it is, the class. Now there's one other thing I haven't done here, show version. The configuration register is set to 2142, which means if I did nothing else right now and then rebooted the router, it wouldn't load the configuration that I just repaired because I've told it to ignore that. So I need to go to the global configuration mode and say that config register value needs to be set back to 0x2102. Now, I've completely repaired my running configuration. I did the no shutdown on the 2 Ethernet ports. I reset the enable secret password to something I know. I set the configuration to be proper. So now I'll do a copy run start and repair the configuration. And now I can do a reload and it'll be proper. Actually, I fixed it. I've copied it. And if this is a production router, I could stop at this point. I wouldn't have to reload it to prove it's working because all the interfaces are back up. All the passwords are correct. Let me log off. First password Cisco. Put the privilege exec mode. Should be class. So we recovered everything. But just to check to be sure, show version. Now look what happens when I do show version. It's 2142 right now, but when it boots up next time, it'll be back to the normal 2102 and it'll work properly. So I'll go ahead and actually do a reload now, just to prove that it works. So we have completely repaired the router using the password recovery process. The process on the Cisco switches is similar, except instead of typing control break, you hold down the button on the front of the switch. After you apply power to it, switches don't have switches. You have to pull the plug loose from the back of the switch. And you mash that mode button on the front of the panel down, and you put the power plug back in. You wait for the light to stop blinking, and then you're going to go through a similar procedure where you can copy the backed up copy of the startup configuration file, and you're already at the privilege exec mode, and you can just reset the passwords. So it's booting back up okay. Should be password Cisco to get to the user exec mode and get to the privilege exec mode. Should be class and show IP interface brief. And all of the interfaces are up and show version and show versions back to normal 2102. So we've completely successfully recovered, or really not recovered, but reset. We call it password recovery, but it's really resetting the password to something that we already know. Okay.